Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tracy Wyman, and I'm the Chief Impact Officer at the Science Based Targets Initiative, and I'm going to be your host for our webinar. We are here today to help you navigate the draft Corporate Net Zero Standard version 2, which is now open for public consultation. Our aim today is to give you some insights that you need to provide informed feedback to shape the science-based, innovative, and commercially pragmatic framework to support corporate action. Before we start, I just want to share a little bit of housekeeping details. So the webinar will be conducted in English. This is the first session, and there'll be another session later today. The first session will have live translation in French and Mandarin. So if you're here and you want to access the live translation, select your preferred language by clicking on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. We're going to be streaming live on Zoom, and there will be a recording, including translations, available on YouTube after the event. Before we start, I just want to remind all of my panelists that we're having live interpretation, and that means we have to speak slowly and leave a little bit of space in between long phrases, especially if there's anything complicated. So thanks for that. I am delighted to introduce my speakers today. David Kennedy, our Chief Executive Officer at SBTi, Alberto Carrillo Pineda, who is our Chief Technical Officer, and Emma Watson, our Head of Standards. We're going to start with opening remarks from David. Then Alberto will provide an overview of the Corporate Net Zero Standard revision process, and we'll finish with a Q&A session where Emma will join me, David, and Alberto to respond to some of the questions that we've received prior to the interview. I want to thank everyone who took time to send us questions in advance. We tried to find the ones that were, the most prevalent from the most people, and let's go ahead and get started. So please join me in welcoming David Kennedy for opening remarks. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Tracy, and good morning, everybody. And as Tracy says, I'm David Kennedy. I am the new CEO of SBTi. This is week 2 for me, so I'm going to share some early thoughts, and that's what they are, early thoughts. I am immersing myself in the organization, learning about it, and talking to as many people inside and outside the organization as possible. So the first thing to say is what a wonderful organization SBTi is. I have joined because I think it's been a remarkable journey. The growth of the organization, the reach, the 10,000 companies that it now works with, the commitments it has secured, the validated targets, and the focus in the corporate world on net zero transition. So a remarkable journey. I came from EY, where I was a partner leading on net zero transition. Every conversation there involved SBTi. As we go forward, there is such an important role for SBTi to play. We have to evolve, we have to change as the world is changing, and we have to focus more and more on action and implementation, which is what everybody is now focused on. I think it's important to acknowledge there are some real big challenges in net zero transition for business and for SBTi. So we had a difficult period last year with the position that we were developing on credits, and which you can see more fully formulated in the draft standard. There are companies that have set 2030 targets that are going to be very challenging in many cases to me, and they're wondering, what should we do? We have a challenging political situation, particularly in the US, which has raised questions, I think, in boardrooms and C-suites around the world. But, and here's the really important thing, I talk to many, many companies. They remain committed to net zero transition. And that is understandable, because if you're not committed, you are taking a bet that we will not be living in a carbon constrained world. I think that is a bad bet. I think many people across business think that would be a bad bet. We will be in a carbon constrained world over the next 5, 10, 20, and 30 years, and businesses that are forward thinking need to plan and to prepare for that. And that's what SBTi is all about. There are so many companies who have reached out to me, I should say, so many companies who see the value in SBTi, and so many companies who want us to succeed, which is great. In terms of what we will do going forward, and if we think in terms of why, what, and how. So why, for me, SBTi is about working in partnership with businesses who want to make the net zero transition. The what, absolutely, we have to be science-based. That is fundamental. It is our reason for being. But I think Tracy just said we need to be pragmatic as well. We need to be action-focused. In terms of the how, we need to be a listening organization, an organization that engages, that is in conversation with business and with the other partners that we have in the ecosystem of net zero corporate transition. So that's a couple of thoughts on the why, what, and how of SBTi. Actually, I think those flow through into the draft standard, which I can't take credit for. That is for the team at SBTi, but I think it's a real move forward, and I want to highlight some of the key elements of that before handing to our Chief Technical Officer, who many of you will know, Alberto. But for me, the key elements that represent the step forward that is pragmatic, that is action-focused. One, we set out at a high level for now the process for assessing progress towards the end of a target cycle. That's really important. You've made a commitment. How did you do? Second thing is we've split scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. Again, really important, because the challenges in addressing scope 1 and scope 2 are different, and we can now reflect that in our approach. 3, we have started to focus more on action within this standard. And so you can see for scope 2, that is not commitment to an emissions pathway. It is a commitment to electricity sector decarbonisation no later than 2040, and ideally earlier. In many cases, many countries, many companies are seeking to get to zero emissions from electricity well before 2040. We focus on action as well, because there is a link in the draft standard with transition planning, and many companies now are engaging in transition planning. Scope 3 emissions, we evolved the approach there with a real focus on net zero alignment for tier 1 suppliers, and particularly emissions intensive suppliers, and then a focus on what are the policies that you can also put in place for various categories of scope 3 emissions. I think the last thing, and I've already referred to this, our position on credits, and this is in the space of pragmatism, but it's also in the space of being science-based. We do need investments in removals. We do need flows of finance, and credits are the mechanism, with lots of caveats, but they are the mechanism to mobilize those flows of finance. There are several uses of credits that are set out in this draft standard. So credits can never be a substitute for decarbonisation, reducing the carbon footprint, but they can be a very good complement within a science-based approach. So I'm going to leave it there and say I'm so pleased and proud to have joined SBTi. What a wonderful organisation. We certainly intend, and I think others intend, that we will have a huge impact working in partnership with you going forward. And the draft standard, which we are here to discuss today, is a major step in that direction. So I'm going to hand over and say, welcome Alberto, and Alberto will take you through some more of the detail of the draft standard before we get on to a bit of Q&A. So thank you, and see you later. Over to you, Alberto.
Thank you, David, and thanks everyone for joining us today. The corporate net zero standard was launched originally in 2021, and it provided a first framework to inform how companies can set credible science-based net zero targets. We have revised the standard a couple of times through minor revisions, and this is the first major revision that we are undertaking to the standard. This is our priority for this year. So far, we have over 1,600 companies that are setting science-based net zero targets, and we continue to observe strong growth in the adoption of science-based net zero targets, with 65% more companies setting net zero targets in 2024 compared to the year before. Our goal for this revision is to make sure that the framework continues to be science-based and pragmatic, as Tracy and David said, and effective in driving science-based decarbonization in the corporate sector beyond 2030, aligning with best practices and also reflecting on the key challenges that companies face to decarbonize. I'll walk you through some of the main changes that are implemented in the standard. The first one that I want to highlight is an important evolution of our framework, and we're introducing a new validation cycle. Through this validation cycle, we provide clarity, but also recognition for companies across the entire journey, from the initial net zero commitment to setting a baseline for targets, then to the target setting process. After that, followed by the disclosure of a transition plan, then providing clarity about the actions that companies can take to implement their targets, then an assessment of progress against targets at the end of the cycle, and then also clarity about how companies can set targets again for the next cycle. This is a new framework, a new validation cycle that we're implementing, and that will bring accountability, but also recognition for companies across the different moments in the cycle. The second overarching change that I want to highlight is the new segmentation that we are introducing in the standard, which is intended to make the standard more accessible for companies of different sizes and operating across different regions. The standard is introducing a new system to customize requirements in the standard based on the size and geography of the company. We're introducing two key segments. One segment for large companies and medium companies operating primarily in upper income regions, and then the second for small companies and medium companies operating primarily in lower income regions. And this is intended to make the standard accessible for companies across all regions and across all sizes. Now, going through some of the key changes, particularly in the target setting section. First, let me start with the fact that we are introducing or we are placing increased focus on transition metrics and methods that supplement emission reduction targets that has been the focus of our standards in the past. We have already used some of these metrics, for instance, through supplier engagement targets, through zero deforestation policies, and we are now placing more emphasis on these metrics, as David mentioned, with the idea of placing more emphasis on action and implementation. but also recognizing some of the challenges that exist today around greenhouse gas accounting, in particular around Scope 3. So this is intended to address one of the main barriers that we have identified that companies face in the science-based target setting process. The second key change is around Scope 3 target setting, which is one of the main challenges, but also main opportunities that companies face to catalyze decarbonization in their value chain. There's a number of changes that we're introducing. Again, more focus on transition metrics to enable action in the value chain. We're also introducing a new approach to target setting boundary that places focus and emphasis on the most relevant sources of emissions in the value chain. And we're also providing clarity and flexibility on how companies can implement their targets, and also flexibility acknowledging the challenges that exist around, for instance, establishing full traceability in the value chain. And so we're using different concepts, including activity pools, supply sheds, and indirect mitigation. The third key change implemented in the standard is providing clarity about the role of carbon removals in the transition towards net zero. The current version of the standard already provides clarity about the level of emissions that are expected for different activities, and the fact that for those activities where there's a level of residual emissions, those need to be counterbalanced with removals. Now, the new standard is providing clarity about what companies should do in the transition towards net zero, and is proposing 3 options in which companies can address residual emissions in the transition towards net zero through carbon removals. Finally, as David mentioned, the standard continues to place emphasis on reducing emissions within the value chain, but also it's providing an opportunity to recognize companies that are going above and beyond, that are addressing the impact of those emissions that they release to the atmosphere as they transition towards net zero, and that are supporting mitigation outside of the value chain. This is an evolution of the current version where this is a recommendation. Now this is something that is going to be recognized through the new standard. The net zero standard is now open for consultation, and we invite everyone to look at the draft, to provide feedback through different mechanisms. We have a number of resources available on our website, and so we encourage you to look at those resources, blog posts, videos, all available on our digital consultation guide on the SBTi website. Thank you.
Thanks, Alberto, for that overview of the draft corporate net zero standard, the process, and some of the key changes that folks looking at the draft should be looking for. I now want to start our Q&A session. So again, thanks for everyone who submitted questions before the webinar. The first question I want to pose to Alberto: what is SBTi proposing when it comes to removals?
Thanks, Tracy. Well, the first point I want to highlight and to reiterate is the fact that the standard places emphasis on driving decarbonization in the value chain, but also recognizes that there are some residual emissions, and that those residual emissions need to be counterbalanced with removals. This was already introduced, as I mentioned, in the first version of the standard, where companies are expected to counterbalance or neutralize those residual emissions from the net zero target year onwards. And what we are doing with this revised standard is providing clarity about what companies should do in the transition towards net zero. There are 3 options that are presented here. The first option is for companies to set removal targets as a requirement. The second is where companies are recognized when they set removal targets and where they address residual emissions in the transition towards net zero. And the third one is where this is presented as an option. companies can address residual emissions through removals, but they may also decide to, instead of counterbalancing those emissions through removals, to abate them directly. And so these are the three options that are currently presented for consultation. And also, I want to highlight what the standard is proposing in relation to beyond value chain mitigation. As I mentioned, in the current version of the standard, the standard recommends companies to support mitigation outside of the value chain. The new standard is proposing to recognize companies that are addressing the impact of ongoing emissions in the transition towards net zero and are supporting mitigation outside of the value chain. This is an area that would be an optional recognition for companies that are going above and beyond setting and implementing their science-based targets.
Thanks for that, Alberto. I want to bring Emma into the conversation now for the next question. So Emma, what are we proposing with the draft standard when it comes to Scope 3?
Thanks, Tracy. Hi, everybody. Well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that we understand that Scope 3 can pose a major challenge to companies, and this is largely because of the complexity and dynamic nature of value chains. But we also realize that this is probably the biggest opportunity for us to drive decarbonization. So we've made this a major focus of the revision, and really that goes down back to what David was saying around the action and implementation piece. So there are 4 major updates that we've made in relation to Scope 3, and Alberto went into some detail on this already, but I'll just kind of reiterate some of them here. So first of all, there is a requirement for all companies to set science-based Scope 3 targets if they fall within the category A of size and geography. So that's essentially the larger companies that are in higher income regions. For category B companies, which are smaller companies in lower income regions, setting Scope 3 targets remains optional. The second area that we focused on is updating the target boundary. So currently within the corporate net zero standard, companies are required to include a minimum of 67% of their Scope 3 emissions within their near-term targets and 90% of their Scope 3 emissions within their long-term targets. So it's basically a minimum percentage threshold that companies are working with at the moment. This has now been updated within the proposed standard. So really this is focusing on the relevance of the emission sources. So what we're looking at here are the areas of emissions, the activities that are super critical for the transition to net zero. So companies need to be looking at those activities and making sure that those are transitioning, but also looking at the Scope 3 emission sources within their own value chain and seeing what's important for them. The third area that we've updated is around the different methods for target setting. And again, this goes back to the action piece. So we've incorporated much more focus on those transition metrics, so alignment targets. And these are really focused on the outcomes that we'd like to see in order to indicate that companies are making that transition towards net zero. There still is the option for companies to set targets on an absolute or emissions intensity basis, but really we wanted to include these additional options to make sure that companies have that flexibility and see what drives the greatest change for them. Then finally, we have provided much more detail on how companies should be implementing their Scope 3 targets. And really that is looking at areas that are much less traceable within the value chain. So within the standard, we've acknowledged the use of different interventions, first of all, at the activity pool level, but also looking at indirect mitigation mechanisms on a time-bound basis for those emission sources that have limited traceability.
Okay, Thanks so much, Emma, for that deep dive. Of course, all the information is available in the Net Zero Standard draft, so go ahead, everyone, and have a look at that after the webinar. I want to take us now from the detail of the standard up, to a couple of big picture questions. So we're going to go back to David now. And this is a really interesting one. Why are we sticking to 1.5 degrees Celsius, David?
Thank you, Tracy. And that's a really important question. And to answer it, I would start with the wording of the Paris Agreement. And the wording refers to well below 2 degrees as the climate objective and as close to 1.5 degrees as possible. And the reason for that, and the reason that the climate objective was changed at the time of Paris and made more stringent, is because the scientific evidence says there is a lot of risk on the range 1.5 to 2 degrees. Hence, we should try to keep to 1.5 degrees. Now, what we say in the draft standard is that the central scenario upon which the standard is based is 1.5 degrees with limited overshoot. And that reflects the fact that this is the climate objective for the international community. And it is desirable given what I've just said about risk. Now, it's also important to note there is a very limited carbon budget left relative to 1.5 degrees with limited overshoot. And so that becomes very challenging. I think a lot of people are asking the question, is it realistic? And in that respect, what I would point out is, so 1.5 degrees with limited overshoot is our central scenario. But if you have a climate objective that is consistent with Paris in the sense closer to 2 degrees than 1.5 degrees, and you ask the question, what would we do that is different in terms of pathways for corporates and actions? In that broader range of climate objectives, you still want corporates to do the same thing. So corporates should be aiming to get to net zero by 2050. They should be doing a set of things to reduce their carbon footprint, which includes heat decarbonisation, transport decarbonisation, and electricity decarbonisation. And these things are all central to the draft standard. So while our central scenario is 1.5 degrees with limited overshoot, and I think that's right, actually the draft standard is very, very relevant to a carbon constrained world with a broader range of climate objectives than that central scenario. And let's put it a different way. If you were to commit via this standard, would you end up doing things that you regretted because at some point the climate objective evolves in the context of the international community? And I think the answer is no. What we've set out is low regrets in a carbon constrained world, and it's low regrets because whether it's 1.5 degrees, whether it's well below 2, you still want to get to net zero by mid-century. You still want to do the same set of things to achieve that. And the standard embodies those things. So I would encourage people, whatever your view on 1.5 degrees and the realism of that, to use this standard because it is highly relevant to a range of scenarios for a carbon constrained world. Thank you, Tracy, and back to you.
Thanks so much, David. Excellent and thought-provoking. The last question that I have for you again, David, is, we're busy now updating our flagship product, and we're asking everyone on this call and everyone they know to go read the draft standard and think about it and feedback to us. And it will take some time, right, to update the standard. So why should companies set net zero targets now using the current version of the standard?
Thanks, Tracy. So look, for me, the real value in the draft standard is the 2030s and commitments for the 2030s, which is a key decade in the net zero transition generally and for corporates as well. And so I hope many corporates who have targets at the moment will follow the process in the draft standard, and they will set targets for, say, 2035, and they will do that several years before 2030. And the reason to do it several years before is so that you can then plan and you can start to implement. We know that action has long lead times in the net zero corporate transition. So that is what I hope for this version of the standard. Now, there are many companies actually at the moment who don't have near-term targets but want to work with us. And we know they want to work with us because they've made commitments in 2023 and 2024. And there are thousands of companies in that category who have made commitments and are working towards submitting targets for validation. And the strong message there is go ahead this year and next year and use version 1 of the standard to set particularly near-term targets that follow on from those commitments. And it's really important that you don't wait. You need targets as a company. We know that targets galvanize action. And so to have a target that you set this year that you've been working towards, or next year that you've been working towards, I strongly encourage you to do that. Now, question, will you miss out if you set a target under version 1 rather than waiting for version 2? And the answer is no. You won't miss out because some of the flexibilities that are in version 2, we will have a simple process that you can bring those into your commitment when version 2 becomes operational. And we say actually in the draft standard, an example is the approach to scope 3, which you will be able to adapt if you should want to do that. So you won't lose out. You should set your target now on the basis that you've been planning to set it. And as I say, there will be opportunities to bring in the best of version 2 and the next time around. So when you are setting targets at the end or before the end, I've said, of the cycle to which you're committed, you would do that using version 2. So that is a strong message from us. Please go ahead and submit your targets for validation in 25 and 26 under version 1. And in due course, you will be able to benefit from version 2. But don't leave a gap where you've got no target because you're waiting for version 2. That is not a good way forward. Thank you, Tracy. Back to you.
So that is a really clear message. There's no time like the present. Don't wait. Go ahead and get your targets in and look forward to using the next version of the standard when the time comes. Thanks so much for that, David. Now, the last question that we got, of course, from lots of people was, well, how do we get involved in the consultation? And I'm going to take that one myself. So we've published everything you need to take part in the consultation on our website. To explore the draft standard and understand it, go ahead and look at the digital consultation guide. There's a blog post, there's a video series which share important details about the proposals in the new standard that sets out how the new standard is different from the current standard. And again, I'm not sure we've said this clearly enough yet on the webinar. All of these are proposals, right? So the point of the consultation is to get input from our stakeholders. So that's everyone on this webinar. It is everyone you know who has an interest in the corporate net zero standard. We need to get feedback on the proposals so that we can develop a next iteration of the standard that is robust and credible, science-aligned, and pragmatic. Can't say it enough. If you're a company or representing a company and you're interested in piloting the draft standard, keep an eye on our website, on our newsletter, on social media, and pretty soon we'll be posting information about how you sign up to join the pilot. Also sign up for our mailing list, follow us on social media, and you'll receive all the latest updates. And I'm sure that our tech team are posting relevant links in the chat box so that you can get all the information by email later. So that's the process. Please participate. That's the end of the questions. I want to thank everyone again who sent us questions to guide and shape the webinar. Before we wrap up, I just want to highlight again the importance of your participation. So your feedback is unbelievably important. We need to refine the standard to simplify it, clarify it if needed. So if there are aspects of it that you think maybe make sense but could be more clear, go ahead and let us know that. And just a reminder that the consultation is open. It will close on the 1st of June. It will close on the 1st of June. It will close on the 1st of June. There is not going to be an extension. So please go ahead and look at the materials, collect your input from your internal stakeholders, figure out what you want to tell us, and use the consultation form to get your input back to us. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We really look forward to hearing from you. And thank you so much for being part of our community and making the work that we do possible. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.